Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. Today, I guess we will talk about the burning questions people have.
Yeah.
To use a pun.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you've been worrying about a different kind of burning, sunburning.
You like this tan, don't you?
Yeah.
You know, I like the gray in my beard because
Yeah.
it really makes the tan come out.
I mean, I think it accentuates your eyes and your teeth to a lesser extent.
Okay.
I mean, I meant that as a compliment.
Oh,
Did you
okay.
not take it that way?
I didn't know how to take it.
I'll tell you this though. I probably hadn't laughed as hard at a podcast as I did at our one from last week in a while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like when we were talking about, and I was like, "How many followers do you have to get to before I can call you an influencer?" How about that?
I think we both qualify as what is it, micro influencers?
I like that.
That's what my wife calls me, a micro influencer.
I love that. How about a nano influencer? I think that's what I am.
Like a nanobyte.
Yeah. But yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions about burning for turkeys here lately, and I think it's good timing because we're kind of getting back into a time of the year where you do get a few more rain-free periods and maybe get a few more lower humidity days. It's all relative at this time of year, right?
Well, you know, a lot of the time when you get a burn ban, it also happens at this time of year, and I get plenty of questions from folks that are frustrated that they don't have a burn window because they're not allowed, and then several people that have been burning in other times of the year have questions about the conditions that you pick, or you know, what are their advantages to burning at this time of the year. You know, other than just expanding the burn window, in other words.
Right. I get those questions a lot, and they're along that same vein. And the one thing that I think I would like people to take away from this episode, if nothing else, is that there's not a right time of the year to burn for turkeys.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. I've been a really strong proponent of burning when you get the opportunity.
Yeah. And
a lot of the details are not as important as frequency.
Yes.
You know, that fire return interval is the primary filter.
That's right.
That is influencing the vegetation outcomes from your fire regime.
And one of the things that I'm excited about in that regard is that Craig Harper is finishing up the first few years of a study looking directly at fire seasonality in a way. I don't want to say that no one's ever looked at that before, because that's not true. They have, but he's looking at it at a way that's going to be very relevant to what we're talking about, to turkeys.
Yeah.
And provide a lot of information on that. So I look forward to it. But from the preliminary data that I've seen from that study, I mean, it just reiterates and underlines what you just said, which is that frequency is way more important than season.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to season, as I was telling you, I just got done having a conversation about this with a landowner not too long ago. When you first start to implement fire in an area, especially if it's an area that was previously closed canopy forest, most times you're going to have to burn in winter to start out with, because you don't have the fine fuel layer, the vegetation, the grasses that are very flammable, especially in the understory, to carry the fire. And that is especially true if you're burning in a system that is, well, I shouldn't say it that way. if you're burning in a hardwood as compared to a pine forest, because pine litter is way more flammable. So if it's a hardwood forest and it does not have a history of fire, it's going to be even more difficult and probably make it more important to burn those first couple rotations in winter than it would be in a pine stand, for example. But I usually burn pine stands for the first couple times in winter too.
Yeah. Another thing, if you're in an area, I've seen it with longleaf a few times and worked with a couple of other fire scientists that have impressed this upon me that even longleaf pine, if you have a really strong duff layer that has built up,
Yeah.
because of decades of fire suppression, so
Oh
still
yeah.
longleaf in the overstory, but
Yeah.
you haven't re-entered with fire for a long time. And you kind of imagine, folks have probably seen this and maybe may not have paid attention, but uh, if you go to the base of those trees and they kind of have a mound of duff
Oh
around
yeah.
them, even in that circumstances, you can really stress the even longleaf
Yeah.
if it's going to,
If they look like a landscaping tree that's been mulched,
yeah,
that's
around
kind
the
of what
base
you're
of it.
describing. Yeah.
Yeah, and in that case, you don't really want a popcorn day, so to speak, where everything's so dry and volatile that you'll burn that duff even round. You can girdle the tree even with fire.
Hmm.
In that
Yeah.
case, picking days that maybe there's a little more moisture, and during the dormant season where you can kind of chip away at the duff. Most people probably don't have that scenario, but I think it's just reiterating the point that starting in the dormant season, because the conditions are more stable, the the ambient temperature is lower, so you have a little more playroom on that. And the hardwood systems, the litter is a little more flammable, and the sunlight hitting the ground is drying things out.
Yeah.
So it's good to start there.
Yeah.
But we kind of get sucked into this vortex, so to speak, to think that's the only time there is to burn. And I hear it all the time, even from people that are really experienced and have been doing it for decades. You know, you hear, "Oh, we're back around to burn season again."
Yeah.
I mean, I hear that a lot
Hmm.
with people that are far more experienced with fire than I am.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. For
I think
sure.
sometimes that can detract from getting the fire on the ground that we're trying to accomplish because we
Right.
just limit ourselves to too too short of a window.
Yeah. I agree. And if it's a stand that's also been immediate or just recently thinned, there's also potential damage to feeder roots too,
Yeah,
burning right after the thinning. So that's another reason that you might want to consider winter to dial back that intensity of that fire.
yeah. That being said, if you're in an open forest condition, expanding the and you've been burning some already,
Hmm.
expanding the burn window, you can accomplish some things by doing that. But, would not just expanding the burn window to get more fire on the ground or make it easier for you to get fire on the ground, but diversifying the timing can start to accomplish some other things, like
Sure.
diversifying the structure available at any given
Sure.
time.
Yeah. I mean, I talked to a landowner a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me, "Look, I've had this area on a 2-year burn rotation. When we burned it, I think he said like 5 or 6 times on a 2-year burn rotation." And he said it's just gotten to the point now where basically all I do is I change the height of sweet gum and briars every time I burn. I just make them
Yeah,
shorter when I burn.
yeah.
And I
There's
said,
something to
well,
be said about that.
yeah.
That's
Oh,
good.
well, it
Don't let
is.
them
That
go
is
on.
good. Okay. Well, and let me clarify this up front too. That is better than not burning.
Yes.
Um, if the objective is related to a vegetation condition that it can be achieved with burning, right? So, but even with that being said, I mean, what do you think I told him? Why do you think I told him that that was all he was getting responding with sweet gum and briars?
Probably burning during dormant season.
Yeah, because he's
over and
always
over
burned
again.
during he's burned that stand in March for all 5 or 6 rotations.
Yep.
And so that's when I start thinking about diversification of timing.
Yeah, you start to select for a suite of plants, some of it from lack of outright kill, they just keep
Right.
resprouting, and some of it's probably favoring those plants for other reasons,
Yeah.
and you tend to increase native warm season grass composition, and you tend to retain a suite of hardwood species that could differ depending on where you're at.
Mhm. And for that reason, that's why we reiterated so many times on this show that it's important to at least know the most commonly occurring plants in your area.
Yeah.
Um, so if you know like a dozen that benefit turkeys, a dozen that potentially diminish habitat value for turkeys, you're off to a pretty good start. And we even have an episode on that.
Yeah. You know, another thing that came to mind, we can link these in the show notes for people. I really like visuals. That's why I keep bringing it up all the time. But I cut a few videos from tall timbers out of the Stoddard plots.
Mhm.
I did one with Kevin Robertson, the fire scientist that works on plant
Yeah.
ecology, basically at tall timbers. And then I may have even done one where I was the talking head in the video. But to me, those are striking examples.
Yeah.
You can go into the Stoddard plot that is a 2-year return interval. They have 3 replications of that.
Mhm.
And they're still full of hardwoods, even though they have been burned every 2 years since 1960.
Yeah.
They've never missed one.
Right.
Burned it every other year since
Right.
1960. What I mean, we're talking about a lifetime,
Yeah.
for most people of
Yeah.
a particular fire return interval, that it is still full of hardwoods.
Right.
They didn't get rid of them,
Right.
but there are some key things that happened with return interval that it was not apparent to me until I have worked in those plots quite a few times
Mhm.
now, and being, involved with Kevin in the plots, and also we had a recent master student that did some really cool fire season work, where I learned a lot from her work, Emma Zeitler and Kevin, which we can talk about because it was fire season based. I wanted to bring it up, but one of the things that was, well, the first thing that was striking to me is the hardwoods are still present.
Right.
There are fewer hardwoods in the annual burn than the 2-year and 3-year and so forth, but in the 2-year return interval is still, I wouldn't say completely dominated by
Mhm.
woody plants, but a large portion of the biomass available is still. So
Yeah.
they've been burning them in March. I think almost every fire has occurred in March, if not late
Right.
February,
Right.
since 1960.
Right.
And the biggest difference between the 2-year and the 3-year and the others is if you burnt, let's say we burned all of them, even though one's been on 2-year for 60 years and the other one's been on a
Mhm.
3-year for 60 years, but sometimes they line up where you burn both in the same year, right?
Sure.
Every 6 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, when you're standing in those plots, they look quite different, primarily in height, even though they both were burned last March, like 6 months
Mhm.
ago. Uh, they'll both have, post oak or water oak, or there's various hardwood species in that particular site
Right.
that will be present in both plots, but the individual plants will be substantially larger in the 3-year than the 2-year, even though both were burned 6 months ago.
Does that apply to the herbaceous plants or just the woody plants?
That's a good question. I
Because I
haven't
could see it being
noticed
true
it
for
with.
woody, but it would surprise me with herbaceous.
I haven't. It's not striking with other
Yeah.
species, but I suspect you'd see some degree of
Yeah.
it even with the
Right.
perennial herbaceous plants.
Right.
which Kevin has done some work on it. And as what people were probably thinking is what the data seem to indicate. The plants that are in that 3-year interval have another year to allocate, you know, their energy to storage in the
Mm.
roots. So when
Yeah.
they get top killed, they have more energy to put into the resprout and they
Yeah.
grow faster.
That makes sense.
So even though you're 6 months post fire in both, the 2-year and 3-year, the plant size is substantially different, even though they were both
Yeah.
top killed at the same time.
Right.
And that has been something that's really striking to me. First of all, you don't see this super strong compositional difference
Mhm.
between the two, but you do see quite a difference in the rate of growth of plants, even though they're the same species. And the plots are side by side. It's not like they're in a
Mhm.
different
Yeah.
site index or something.
Yeah. What's really interesting to me about those plots, um, and the thing that that I really try to impress upon my students when I talk about this, and we don't go down there to the Stoddard plots, but I show them photos of it, is when you go from a 2-year fire return interval to a 3-year fire return interval, you're going to get some hardwoods that are going to escape into the mid story with a
Yeah.
3-year
On that
return.
site, yeah,
Yeah.
the long growing season, high rainfall,
Yeah.
high productivity site, 3 years is too
Yeah.
long.
And it's remarkable because, like you said, they've been burned for 60 years. And if you go into any of the plots that are on a 2-year or a 1-year, for the most part, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Marcus, because you've spent more time down there than I have. But for the most part, I'm just trying to visualize them. I'm thinking that there's only like dominant trees in the plot, maybe a few smaller trees here and there.
In other words, there's lack of a mid-story for the
There's
most
no
part.
mid-story. It's basically like all vegetation is like belt height down, right?
For the most part, yeah.
In the 1 and 2-year returns, but then you get to the 3-year, and then you've got a well-established hardwood mid-story that's taller than your head. I mean, like, you can't even
Yeah,
reach the
the
top.
3-year, that's the
Yeah,
case. And the 4-year, you pretty well have lost all of
yeah.
the hardwoods,
Now the
to the
important
degree
thing.
that it starts to negatively affect flammability of that particular system,
Yeah.
because those hardwoods are off-site, mesophytic species
Mhm.
that we bring up every
Yeah,
once in a while that kinda suppress fire.
yeah. But people should not necessarily just take that information and apply it, directly to their properties, because if you're in an area with a
Yeah,
shorter growing season or lower soil fertility, you might be able to get along away with a little bit longer fire return interval. But
yeah,
for a lot of areas in the South, that pattern holds pretty true.
yeah, and, that's also not to say that there couldn't be some value from having that 3-year interval.
Yeah,
For example, on some sites, 3 years since fire usually has the highest quality nesting structure.
right.
So, or if you're interested in deer, also that that's where the fawn is going to be
Yeah,
that hanging out, right?
yeah.
So,
And I mean, I have data from another study. It shows that generally speaking, deer forage in those plots is going to increase up to 3 or 4 years since fire.
yeah, and
Until
I
it
found the
basically
same thing.
gets until it basically gets so tall they can't reach it.
Right, and that's the same thing I found in a poor site that was longleaf.
Mhm.
The deer forage available continued to increase with time since fire until you get 3 or 4 years,
Right.
like you said. So, yeah, that's the thing that makes this tricky is we're trying to prepare you with information that then you can kind of work through the checklist of what you should expect on your own place. Like
Mhm.
there are various things that could affect the outcome of fire, and you need to think about what your objective is, understand what that looks like, and be able to
That's
determine
the
if you're
most
needing
important
it.
point, right?
Yeah,
Is figuring out what it should look like.
right. And if you have that search image where you know approximately what you want the vegetation structurally and compositionally to look like, then you start working through these other things like how frequent do I need to be?
Mhm.
And that I tend to start on the more frequent side, and then in some cases, worked with landowners where they've relaxed that a little bit.
Yeah, and another point I think that's important to make too is oftentimes landowners have the ability or the luxury really to relax their fire return interval if the site has previously been sprayed with an herbicide specifically targeting woody vegetation.
Yep.
Because
Yeah, I
woody
think
vegetation
that's
is oftentimes what forces us to burn again.
yeah. Another thing in terms of the speed of recovery, and I think we'll probably get into this with some of our other discussion about timing, but some of the previous work that I was involved with in Mississippi, when we were applying fire during the summer, midsummer, like June, not only did we get better outright kill of sweet gum in particular, but it also seemed like the ones that survived were much slower
Mhm.
in terms of their growth.
Yeah.
We did not see that on the suite of hardwoods that we had. We just had this fire season experiment at Tall Timbers,
Yeah.
Emma's work. We That was one thing that I was keen to look at, and she did a great job measuring the growth rate of plants, like biomass allocation and also height growth, and that did not stick out as this huge effect for the suite of plant species, but it does seem to align that the the off-site hardwoods, in her case it was water oak and uh,
And what he means by that, while you're thinking about this, Marcus, is
I forgot the other.
offsite is stuff that naturally should not occur in areas that are regularly burned.
Right, they're not typical of upland
Mhm.
open pine, savanna type
Mhm.
conditions that would be frequently burning. And that was one of the things that we were really interested in, and particularly during the summer when we burned at that time that was more consistent with the historical lightning season. It seemed to more favor the couple of hardwood species that uh, that are adapted to the frequent fire system
Yeah.
over the others.
Right.
But I was expecting particularly the fall fire to really affect the growth rate of the plants because we had seen some of that in the Mississippi studies, and it just didn't show that strong effect.
Mhm.
That being said, we have a couple of experiments, and I'm really curious to see. I haven't seen some of the results from the study that Craig's leading.
Mhm.
Uh, we have seen some compositional effects from some of the studies around the South.
Mhm.
That particularly the midsummer and fall can start to shift the plant community, particularly away from some of those problematic hardwoods and grasses in some cases, toward a broadleaf herbaceous community, or in other words,
Yeah.
forbs,
Right.
which we talk about quite frequently,
I would
being
assume
dispersed.
everybody listening knows what that is. But, that is all true, and generally speaking, that's the way that I think about it is, if you start, let's just say you start your annual burn window in January, and continue it all the way through December, the way that I typically think of it as is the further that we can get along into the growing season, the more root kill I'm likely to achieve on hardwoods, the more forbs I'm likely to stimulate. I think of it as a gradient as I get later and later in
Yeah,
summer, more hardwood kill, more forbs.
right.
Um, but there's a caveat to that too that I only learned through practical experience of applying fire during non-traditional times of the year that it turns out it's just kind of hard to get stuff to burn in July.
Yeah,
So you have this weird interaction with fire intensity and your ability to apply fire to the ground with the vegetation effects that it has should you successfully implement it.
yeah. Well, no, I think that I'm with you. I know that was a problem on our fire our seasonal experiment with,
Mhm.
uh, with tall timbers. It was also a problem on the regional experiment that Craig's leading. And I personally have had that experience with a couple of experiments with
Yeah.
various graduate students over the years in hardwood systems.
Right.
If you're in a closed canopy hardwood
Yeah.
system, it's not going to burn during that time of year.
Just save your
It,
fuel
it,
and matches, right?
yeah, it just doesn't do well,
Yeah.
without getting the canopy open and transitioning, the community and the understory to something more flammable.
Right.
It just doesn't work well. But even in the case of the pine savanna, you know, without having a full canopy of pines casting needles that are flammable, you know, if you're at 40 or 50 basal area, a lot of the vegetation in that understory, if it's old field vegetation and not, native ground cover like wiregrass
Mhm.
or something, um, you don't have the fuel there either because you don't have enough needle cast.
Yeah.
So it is a weird interaction, and unfortunately, people want us to give a perfectly generalizable
Yeah.
answer, and it's site specific. And the more I work with different scientists on different sites to do different things, the more I realize that it really does depend a lot. Like, what are you going to get out of fire at this time over here is going to be different.
Yeah.
You get
This
on
is kind of an aside to speak to that point, but it's one that I think you'll enjoy, is that, man, how hard is it to do a damn fire experiment? It's, just
the
there's so many factors that affect the outcome of a given
yeah,
burn, and all of and everyone who's a practitioner understands that.
yep,
And they're like, "Well, they see your results, when you submit it to a journal or whatever, and they're like, "Well, why did you get this response? Was it like this when you burned, or did you make sure that you had, this condition or that?" And it's just, I mean, you think about everything related to humidity, temperature, wind, fuel moisture, ignition pattern, topography, and you think of all the ways that it's difficult to hold fire consistent and apply it in a consistent way so that we can measure a consistent result to, develop expected outcomes. And you consider all that, and it's just like, man, why would anybody ever try to do controlled experimentation with
yeah,
prescribed fire? And that's why there are some of these experiments where we shrink it down to a really small plot so that we can do
yeah,
that, but then that limits our ability to make inferences about fire behavior at that larger scale, because the way fire behaves in a 10-meter plot, for example, is very different than 10 acres, is very different than, 1,000
yeah,
acres getting lit off by the
right,
Forest Service, you
yep.
know? So,
Well, yeah, it is. It often the designs seem so simple.
yeah,
It's like, oh, this is going to be really clean, replicated on
when you just talk about it.
randomized block design, and then you get out there, it's like, wow,
Yeah,
man, this was tricky.
yeah,
Trying to do the fire season
yeah,
experiment with 4 times of fire, and then you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we detangle the season effect from the time since fire effect? Because
yeah,
every
that one's a
time you
pain
measure a
too.
plant,
Yeah,
it's always a different amount of time since fire
yeah,
because the fire treatments happen at different times of the year. I mean, it's just like a big mess to try
yeah,
to work through how do you actually measure the response. So we're
yeah.
getting probably too far into the weeds, and
Well, I think we're making an important point for people to understand that this is why, we can't give you a blanket frequency in season,
yeah,
because there's just so much variation from one day to the next.
I think the better strategy is, well, first of all, a good thought process is that fire is probably a good tool for you to manage vegetation to achieve particularly nesting and brooding cover for
Hmm.
turkeys. That's a great tool for you to get there. Not everybody can use it for some reason or another. Maybe you're in a state where the regulations are hindering you, or maybe you don't
Mhm.
own land or whatever. There's reasons, but generally, the application of fire, if it can be achieved, is positive.
Mhm.
And then the second part, and you and I have done as much as we can, and there's been others that have done the same. Take it upon yourself to learn what the structure and composition of the plant community should look like for you to achieve your objective. And if you do that, then, you know, some of it is intelligent tinkering,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
You can adjust what you're doing on your property based on the site specific responses that you're getting, and maybe the timing could be adjusted or the frequency could be adjusted to better achieve that outcome. But without you knowing what that outcome looks like, it's hard to do that tinkering.
And to flip this around, how are you gonna know when it's time to burn if you don't know what it should look like?
Yeah, you don't want to fall into that. I'm burning now because I'm supposed to keep a 2-year fire return interval.
I know. Yeah, that's my point. And so, like, if you can't go out there and if you're gonna go burn an area, you should be able, to theoretically call us up, and tell us, I'm burning this area for turkeys because the structure has become too dense or too tall, or the species composition has shifted away from these plants that are beneficial to turkeys towards these that are less so. If you can't defend that, then you need to learn. You need to learn to get to that point. And it's the same thing with herbicides. I mean, like, how are you going to go out and implement the brooding cover herbicide management strategy that Craig laid out so perfectly last year about this time? If y'all want to go back and look for those episodes, if you can't ID the plants, how are you going to know which plant to spray?
Yeah, I do that with my class. We go out and sometimes some
I'm going to do that this
I'm
fall.
hesitating to say this, but some of the invasive species might aesthetically look fine,
Yeah,
to the untrained eye, and then it's like, well, what if we have very similar structure to what we're trying to achieve here, but it's all a mixture of Kogon grass and you know, Sericea.
yeah. That's awesome. I'm gonna take we start class here in a couple weeks and I do my habitat class in the fall and we start out with plant ID. That's what I'm gonna do my first Friday lab this fall is I'm gonna take them out. We've got a nice little field on our demonstration forest and I'm gonna say, you know, I know a lot of you here probably aren't too keen on learning plant ID. So
Yeah.
we're gonna do a little exercise and, talk about which plants would you spray and which ones would you not. What
Yeah.
about this one over here? What about that one over there? And just to kind of drive that point home.
I'd start when I was teaching habitat in the fall. I did something similar to that, where I'd take them to a field
Yeah.
right out of the gate, and just ask, what do you think about this field? Is it good for wildlife? And
Yeah.
then we'll kind of work our way down. It's like,
Yeah.
well, it's basically a Bermuda field that they stopped mowing,
Yeah.
so there's some structure in it.
Probably
But
good for
if
a
you get
deer.
down, if you look underneath it, it's just a thick
Yeah.
mess of Bermuda.
Probably a good
But
place to nest or, for a deer to bed, but beyond that,
maybe
yeah.
it's a pretty good mess from my point of view.
I do something a little bit similar to that where we've got a really nice looking pine woodland that's kind of at the front of our demonstration forest, which is where we got a little pavilion there where I teach most of my classes that are out there. And that pine woodland by the pavilion has been burned annually for a long time. And, so it's big, mature, 20, 24 inch trees, open canopy, just flat out through there. It looks beautiful. Looking at it, it's just grass as far as you can see. But 99% of the grass is Johnson grass, and the only other thing that's growing in there with any regularity is Chinese lespedeza, Sericea lespedeza. And so I take them out there and I'm like, is this good for wildlife? Because a lot of time, and that's a bad question, by the way. People should, our listeners should
Yeah.
understand that good for wildlife is a bad question. Um, and
Why
because
is
it's
it a
not,
bad question,
because it's
Will?
not species specific.
Elaborate.
And
You
to say
can't just
whether or
lay
not
that on them and
it's
not
not
tell them why.
species specific and you're not speaking to what aspect of life history that it does not meet, right? So, um, but anyway, yeah, so I show them that and I say, is this good or bad for wildlife? And up until that point in our program, a lot of them have heard, positive things about, open canopies and fire. And so they see open canopies and they see like all these scorch marks on these trees and they see all this grass growing. They hear a lot about grasslands too in ecology, right? And
Yeah.
and how grasslands are disappearing and so are the species associated with them. So most of them will say that it's good. And then I'm like, well, 99% of what's out there is invasive species that have almost zero wildlife value. um, so I don't know. Maybe we've beaten that horse beyond death, but
Well, I
it's
mean,
important.
we need to just reiterate you're interested in making more turkeys, and part of that is understanding what makes turkeys. And to some people, that's not that fun, trying to know a bunch of plants. But I mean, frankly, now we have apps that can pretty accurately,
Yeah.
get you the plant species really quickly, if not just the genus at least.
Yeah.
And that's usually pretty informative.
Yep.
But that really is the take home message from, I mean, quite a few fire experiments over the years and a lot of experience burning, is that there are a lot of things going on at the site level that could affect the outcome of those fires.
Mhm.
You know, part of part of it for the person is to go through the training, of course, to get your certification and learn about fire and take the safety precautions and everything into consideration. But the other part of that learning experience is to learn what you're trying to achieve and be able to evaluate
Mhm.
success, and understand how to tweak the operations so that you can achieve success
Yeah.
if you're not with your formula.
And I understand that there are a lot of landowners out there that are completely intimidated by that and have never had any training in, plants or land management or anything like that. But the good news is I feel like I don't have data on this, but it seems like in the recent past, most state wildlife agencies have continually improved and expanded their private lands technical assistance programs. So if nothing else, I mean, it's likely that it may take a little while, but you could get a biologist to come out on your property and look around and help you with some of that. In many cases, like I said, through those technical assistance programs for free.
Yeah, and of course there's plenty of knowledgeable consultants available. You
Absolutely.
you have ways to bring that knowledge to the table if you don't already have it.
That's right. There are options out there,
I mean,
resources.
listen to this podcast. Some people think that has improved their skill sets, or at least they
Mhm.
write that in our comments online.
Well, I'm glad you remembered to throw that one in there for our non-listeners.
Oh man,
Come on, non-listeners, you gotta
you
listen.
really got me. Well, we need to remind our listeners that there are still people not listening, and if they think that we're helping make more turkeys, the best way we can do that is to get the information into more people's head.
That's right. That's right. So I know this was kind of a quick one and we jumped around a lot. Um, but
Well, one
I
one
feel
thing I
like I
did
feel like
want
we've
to
given folks some things to think about.
yeah, I did want to ask you one more question
Yep.
that keeps surfacing, and you put me on the spot earlier, so I wanted to put you on the spot.
Fair.
Are there We talked a lot about burning at different times. Is there anything else in terms of conditions, burning conditions, fuel conditions, anything else that you are viewing differently when you're burning at this time of the year versus if you were going to do the same thing in February?
That's a really good question. Um, I'm probably going to have to burn with a higher humidity than, I would in February, just because it's not gonna get as low. Um, Other conditions, I might go with a little bit longer rain-free period. I might be feel comfortable with that this time of year compared to in wintertime when things dry out a lot faster. Just because you have, all the plants are actively growing and full of moisture right now. So you may need a little bit drier conditions, or maybe you would even look for a day. And this is the thing, right? Because we talked about earlier how all this interacts. So so let's just say like maybe you're not able to get that humidity value that you want, but maybe on that burn day, you've got a little bit of wind, right? That'll help you out. It'll help push the fire along. Or maybe it turns out that you're burning and you don't have enough wind one day, but maybe the RH is a little bit lower, so that helps carry the fire. So all this stuff interacts with each other, and just because maybe one parameter you can't find a day that meets that, and I'm not saying to if that's something that's going to make it dangerous, don't do that. But if you're just like, shoot, man, I can't get below 55% humidity, I can't find a day. Well, maybe you look for a day that has 55% humidity that has a, couple mile an hour wind higher wind speed than what you would typically call for in your prescription, and that'll help push it along a little bit. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think so. I just get questions like that quite
Yeah.
frequently, especially, in the last month or so.
Right.
This time of the year, I get that a lot. Uh, I think to add to that, I just want to reiterate wherever you're at, if you haven't done it already and you're interested in using fire, your state agency offers a training where you can get, prescribed fire manager training. So take advantage of that. Two, even my shop put together with some other scientists a free online training. It does not
Mhm.
certify you, but we tried to be all as inclusive as we could of all the things you'd want to think about and learn about when you were using fire. So we can link that in the show notes. Charlotte was foundational in helping create that training. And we go into wildlife habitat considerations and smoke considerations and all
Mhm.
sorts of things.
That's
We
great. So,
also,
like, even if someone has taken a fire training, it would be valuable for them to go into that habitat stuff because most prescribed burn manager training does not include that.
right, and we had other modules in it, and it's freely available to everybody. If you want to take it, and you can take it on your own time. You don't have to do it all at once. You can do it over a couple month
Mhm.
period if you want to. But we went into a few topics that are not covered widely. For example, the another one I wanted to bring up is we talked a good deal about prescribed burn associations, what those are, how they get created, what are characteristics of ones that are successful, and then how might that help you as an individual landowner. And that information I think is important because many people may not be aware that you are likely in a place, if there's a strong fire culture for sure, where you have other landowners that are interested in using fire, and in some cases, they have put together local prescribed burn associations where you can basically participate in fires on other people's land to get experience, share
Mhm.
resources with them. Some of them have fire, like a fire truck and fire tools and those kinds of things that you may
Yeah.
not be able
Yeah,
to
a lot of
keep
them
on hand.
have utility trailers that they'll bring to your property that has everything you need in it.
So you can participate and gain a lot of things from it, even if it's just experience, it may
Mhm.
be worth it, or community, just to
Yeah.
find people that are like minded that want to use
Yeah.
fire.
A lot
But,
of forestry
those
state
are
forestry commissions have those learn and burn events too, so that's
yeah,
another place to look for those.
particularly in the South, that has been a really, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Common opportunity, I guess would be
Yeah.
a good way to put it. Like there are learn and burn opportunities for you to gain experience. I see them commonly in, the deep South in particular. Not that they don't occur elsewhere. I don't really
Mhm.
keep up with it in other places. They may be just as prevalent, but I know they are in the deep South.
Right.
And that, first of all, there are lots of opportunities for you to gain experience and get comfortable with what you're doing, and then learn some. You learn a lot from these different experiences, and you start to understand how you can tweak things to better achieve your objectives in your
Exactly.
situation.
Yeah.
So I think you know the there is a lot of information at your disposal to develop, and presumably folks that are listening to this podcast already know that, and they're
Mhm.
active learners trying to seek out information, or they
Yeah.
wouldn't be listening to us. I don't think they're listening to us because you're funny.
Nah, it's just because of your good looks.
I said listening. They're listening because
They're
of my
listening for
looks.
your good looks. You can hear them through the airwaves.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, maybe
man.
so. Maybe
Yeah,
so.
we're digressing
Yeah.
profoundly at this point.
Well, I don't think so. I think the main thing is, think fire generally is good for turkeys. Take it upon yourself to understand how to use the tool to achieve objectives, and then make sure that you're doing that safely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is if you check off all those boxes and that path to getting certified that, Marcus was talking about, and you build a little bit of experience, maybe do a couple learn and burns, and you're still scared to drop that match on your property, I think that's totally normal. I started with fields. I cut my teeth on them, especially like small food plots, just burning off food plots. Probably like the best learning tool bar none, because they're already open. It's real easy to put a fire break around them. The ground has already been disturbed, so if it needs to be touched
Yeah,
up, just disc around it again. You can make it 2 or 3 passes wide if you want to. You've got consistent fuel. It's probably dried out, especially if you've waited until you get on into spring or summer, or you've even sprayed it. Then it's going to burn really good. And so it's just that's a great place to learn. But even if you don't
yeah,
have that, maybe block off some of your wooded acreage and just burn smaller blocks of it, like
yeah.
your bow range burning idea.
Well, that's one thing I was going to say. Starting small. You don't have to start with the tricky, huge area. That
Mhm.
you're not quite sure how things are going to go. You can start to gain experience in other scenarios, and being able to see the whole unit at the same time like you can in a field, or years ago folks may have heard that bow range burning idea. That
Yeah.
was the same thing.
Yeah.
Get just scale down to a size, and that was a quarter of an acre.
Yeah, but I mean, if you started out, cutting your teeth on burning 20 acres in a block, if it's wooded and you have very little experience, you don't even know where you should be watching. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like, it's so intimidating. It's like, not only can I not see the fire, I don't even know where I need to go look at it. Like, where do I need to spend most of my time? So that's just simple stuff that you're going to gain through experience.
yeah. One of the things with the bow range burning that I really learned from that, it's not that we're going to change the world with quarter acre fires everywhere, but what it did is make it accessible to a lot of people. And they started there. And same thing can be that, with your field situation. And Craig kind of has a hybrid of that he does where he's burning a small field.
Yeah.
But the point is it's making it accessible so that people start using fire and get comfortable with it. And then they start scaling up. I bet in terms of my influence on people using fire, that has been among the top things that
Mhm.
I've ever done.
Yeah.
And all you guys were picking on me about it, and it's like, well, it made it accessible to people,
You know what I
and
just
that's
realized?
that's what you need to do is make it accessible to people.
You're right. But you know what I just realized? You know what you
What's that?
did? You created a gateway drug to prescribe burning. That's what it is.
Well, you can do that in different ways. I don't know if
It's
I'd
a
call it a
gateway
gateway
drug.
drug,
It's a gateway drug.
but, you know, when you're looking at a quarter of an acre, it's like, "Oh, I can do
Yeah,
this.
it gets you
This is
it
not a
but
big
that
deal."
is it. It gets you hooked,
And
you know?
then yeah, and then it's like, "Well, I could do a half acre," and then the next thing you know, it's 25 acres, and you're making a pretty big
Yeah,
difference then,
yeah, that's right.
So it's that gateway in.
That's right. Well, good
Yeah,
stuff, man.
yeah. Well, hopefully, folks are still enjoying these episodes. We are, again, responding to audience. I've gotten quite a few questions in just the last few weeks about burning.
Mhm.
So, and we've been talking about, improving habitat for poult rearing in particular. And this is a good tool to help you get there.
Yep, that's right.
So,
Well, cool.
good stuff.
Maybe we need to do something again about acorns here pretty soon because, folks' minds are gonna be shifting to that.
Acres.
Acorns.
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking about, let's talk about some fall food plot management,
Yeah.
thinking about turkeys for spring. There's a lot of folks who will be planting their deer plots or doing things this fall, so that'll
Next
be another
month.
good thing.
Yeah, September, a lot of that's gonna start. That's a really good point.
Yep. So definitely some good stuff on the horizon like that. Some good, hopefully practical information that can help folks on their
Yeah.
land. So and let us know if you have particular questions. Again, we've gotten a few questions requesting that we talk about this topic. So
Yep.
and here it is. So if you really want to hear about something, let us know, and
And and
we'll
if
kick it up the list.
a lot of you that have, considered sending in questions haven't done so because you think, "Oh, they're not gonna pick mine," there's a good chance we will. Actually, like, these past couple of weeks, I haven't gotten that many. We've had some conversation about previous episodes and things like that here and there, but it's not like we're getting a ton of questions the past couple of
Yeah,
weeks. So there's a good chance if you send it in, we might address it.
yeah. I think pretty much all of the questions that I've gotten in the past 6 weeks or so have
Yeah.
been related to poults or burning,
Yeah.
and we've belabored those topics over the last several episodes. So you're
Hmm.
right. Uh, please let us know if you have things that you want to hear about. So
Cool. Well, we've got a grounded brand giveaway again.
hey now,
Yep. So today we are giving away a Grounded Legacy hunting scene shirt. So,
I like it.
that's a good prize. Yep. And I've got a recipient of that.
In your semi-random process.
Oh, it was completely random this time.
I hope it's somebody we already picked before. We wouldn't even know.
You just love to see me fail.
Only when it's in good humor.
Okay. Only when it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Hey, Marcus, just a moment to I think we should celebrate. I mean, that's like we're at 501 reviews. Can you believe that?
Really?
Yeah. On
Wow.
that's just on Apple.
Yeah. Wow. That's a pretty cool milestone. What are we gonna do when we hit 1,000 reviews?
um,
Nothing special?
I
Keep
don't know.
going?
I might get some McDonald's for lunch on that day. All right.
Mickey D's.
All right. The winner of the Grounded brand shirt is ADK Iceman. So ADK
Iceman.
Iceman, reach out to us. And I wanna read the review because it cracked me up. He said, he or she, I should say. Well, Iceman is probably a guy, right? Probably.
Probably.
He said, I love it when I'm speaking with a customer on a job site and they look in the woods when the gobble happens during the intro song. Cracks me up and has happened on multiple occasions.
That's awesome.
He's on the job site and he hears the intro gobble, and
You know
everybody
what?
looks around for the turkey. That's hilarious.
I do love the intro personally. It's
Yeah,
like I wanted, you know how when you hear a gobble in the woods that's pretty close
yeah,
and it just sends chills down your
yeah.
spine,
Oh, yeah.
like your hair stands up. It gives me that kind of feeling when I
Oh, I
hear it,
know. Yeah, I don't
and
know if we
I
ever
really
said
like
this
that.
before, but that was, that gobble was actually recorded by one of my automated recording units that was on a research
Yeah,
project. That was on a research project.
yeah. I think we said that at one point, but that is a real gobble from
Yeah,
an Alabama turkey.
and that I mean, that gobble is a data point in one of my papers.
Yeah, that's cool.
So, kinda funny to think about
You
the
know,
link.
just a really quick sidebar. We've been going through a lot of our ARU data from all over Florida. And we've
Mhm.
got 2 years of data from a bunch of sites and got some cool stuff on the horizon about that. But they sent me some clips recently, and I went in and clicked on a few of them. You know, we're testing the
Yeah,
data set right now and kind of training artificial intelligence to help process it. And part of that process, you have to go in. Someone manually has to go through the clip and see was there actually a gobble in it. So I clicked through several of them, and a few of them that had gotten wrong. The look, you know, and they were rated low confidence, so that
yeah.
made sense. But then I got into the high confidence ones. And it's like, oh yeah, that was a gobble. So it was like, you know, last Tuesday I was sitting in my office like listening to recordings of gobbles, and I was just over and over. It was like an addiction. Just
I wonder how long you would have to do that before you got tired of it.
I don't know. It was longer than I did it. I'll
Do
tell
you
you
know
that
how
because I
do
did
you know
not get tired of it.
I'll tell you how many my student Matt just listened to as part of his master's research, and I actually guess how many you think he listened to?
How many did he personally listen to?
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with 28,000. Just a random guess.
186,000 gobbles.
You know what? You know how you know if somebody really loves turkeys? If they still want to hear one gobble after they've listened to 186,000 gobbles. I'm gonna ask him that next time
Yeah,
I talk to him.
yeah.
Do you still want to hear one gobble? Because if you do,
You're the man.
can you imagine anything else where you wouldn't just be so sick of it you never wanted to hear of it again? And here he is about to go into a PhD program on turkeys
Well, this is Matt,
after
not
he's listened.
Not Kevin. So Matt's going to
Oh yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
My bad.
yeah.
Well, still,
I
he's
know.
still eat up with turkey, right?
Yeah, he still ate up with turkeys. Yep.
I can't
You
imagine that being the case with any other species.
you know what's my favorite gobble? The first one of the season. The first one, the first morning I'm out in spring. Religious. I mean, it's just like, God. You
My
talking about,
favorite one is the one that just happened.
yeah, that's true too. That's true too. But just, you know what I'm talking about, that first morning you go out to listen
Oh yeah.
and you don't, and you're just standing there and you're like, almost every time I go out, it's so special it seems fake. Like I almost think, no, I'm serious. Like I almost feel there's a part of my subconscious that feels like it's not gonna happen today. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you're waiting for
Like,
that first
do I
one.
still got it?
I'm not worried if I know I never had it. But just hearing that first gobble, like it's almost just magical that it even happens. You know what I'm saying?
Another season where I didn't get skunked. All right.
All right, I gotta
That's
run.
good stuff. All right. Well, we appreciate it, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.